Well, welcome to the journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of the journey. And today we have a special guest. Actually, this is a return guest. Pre-pandemic, Tommy Meeks joined us when we were in the studio, and now he's joining us again. And but today we're going to have Tommy come on and talk specifically about the celebration of Juneteenth. So, Tommy, welcome as always. It's great to see you. I know we were just recently at an event for the Park District with the breaking of the ground for or a fundraiser for Lockwood, and then we broke ground about 2 weeks later. So it's great to see you then, and thank you for coming on to the show.
Thanks for the invitation, Kevin. I appreciate joining you.
So I know coming up, and actually it'll be in a few days by the time this is airing, is the celebration of Juneteenth, and obviously in the last couple years there's become more and more recognition of Juneteenth from a standpoint of being recognized as a federal holiday, and some organizations, some states are recognizing and honoring it for what it is and what it historically has been. But let's go ahead, and if you could maybe share from your perspective, what is Juneteenth, number one, and how long have you been involved with Juneteenth in the Rockford area?
Yeah, I'll start with what is Juneteenth. Juneteenth, well, most people know we had slavery in our country. And all Juneteenth is, I put it like this: if you have a civil war, the war ended April the 10th. So people that lived on the East Coast and in the South, like Florida area, they learned about the freedom of the slaves earlier than the slaves that were further west. And those slaves further west turned out to be Galveston, Texas. And by the time they got to Galveston to tell them the news that they were by law free, you know, with the winning of the war, it was June 19th.
Mm.
General Gordon Granger rode into Galveston, Texas, let those former slaves know that they were free. And they start celebrating in Galveston, Texas on June 19th. Well, it caught on in Texas, and it was a Texas state holiday for years. And then it kept getting pushed around the country, and other people start catching on to it. People like me caught on to it years later. And I started promoting it 33 years ago when I found out my aunt and my uncle told me that my grandfather never let any of his 14 children work on June 19th because that was Juneteenth.
Mm.
And I had never heard of it. So
Mm.
I started looking into it. I found out it wasn't a holiday, but it was observed by the people in Galveston and in Texas and around the country. So I started observing it here in Rockford 33 years ago. Well, next week it'll be 33 years ago, June
Sure,
19th. Yes.
sure. Okay. So from what you understand, when the news got to Galveston that the Civil War had ended, and by the winning of the Union, it allowed the liberation of those former slaves.
Right.
What was it? Was that indicated that like that was like maybe the last farthest west holdout, or how would you
You know,
describe that?
that's the way it appears.
Yeah.
I can't say that that is it for sure, but what I can say is the people in Galveston and in Texas really made this day special. I'm sure there were some people that celebrated the ending of slavery in the month of May, but they were further east.
Mhm.
That didn't catch on like Juneteenth caught on. So I think the way Juneteenth caught on, it was more acceptable uh, by the way things went down. And we as a country, we celebrate June 19th. And
Gotcha.
I always observe the day itself because I look at June 19th as the way I look at the 4th of July. The
Mhm.
4th of July gave us the ability to be severed from England. Um, and we celebrate that. And I think June 19th gives the rest of America that didn't have that opportunity, to be citizens, to be a part of this great country.
Mhm.
June 19th, 1865 gave us the rights. I mean, it had to be eradicated later on, but that's generally what we're trying to talk
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay,
about.
and I imagine, and then obviously, I have an interest in history and certain aspects of history that I've probably dove into deeper in some areas than other areas. But I imagine that there must have been the organization of the individuals from Galveston, and then that spread throughout Texas. But I imagine that the perseverance of that, because I imagine that there was also a strong opposition to wanting this to be acknowledged, let alone celebrated.
But that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people don't realize this. And when I started promoting it years ago, what I thought, I tell you the truth, Kevin, what I thought was my ancestors came over here in a slave ship. They worked, they toiled, they suffered for 400 years in this country. But what I recently found out, the internet is technology itself is so important today. You can learn so much. What I found out is that Frederick Douglass was pressuring Abraham Lincoln to let former slaves, free free people, and people called the Maroons who were fighters in Africa. They end up here in this country. He said, let these black men join the war, otherwise we will lose this war.
Mhm.
Now, if we lose the Civil War, number one, slaves aren't free. Number two, we don't have the United States no more because we got the North and the South. So Abraham Lincoln, we were losing the war. So he agreed with Frederick Douglass, and he let 200,000 African American Buffalo soldiers join the military, and that turned the tide of the war. Those black soldiers were the ones that rode into Galveston, Texas, with General Gordon Granger, who was
Mhm.
white, bring in General Order Number 3, they call it. And that's some history that a lot of people don't know. That I didn't know when I first started promoting Juneteenth. That I knew some of our men had fought in the war, but I didn't know the extent of how important it was that those 200,000 men that joined late helped save the country. That's the way I look at it. Because you
Sure.
lose the war, we don't have a country.
Right, right. Oh yeah, it would have changed everything, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and who knows what kind of ripple effect and for how long that delay would have continued to happen. And and I
Well, you could
think
you
go
go.
no, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to cut you off, but I
Oh,
said, think of this. Right after slavery, they gave us 10 years of Reconstruction. And in those 10 years of Reconstruction, you're familiar with the Reconstruction
mhm,
period.
yeah,
I mean, that's when we had our rights to be politicians. We had rights. And we did so well in those 10 years that it upset a lot of people, even people from the North.
mhm,
So the North and the South, the whites, got together and figured out something to win a presidential election. I think it was, can't think of the president right now. I'll talk about him all the time. He come to me. But it was, I think it was 1875, 76. They got together and worked out a deal that the South could still have everything back, have everything the way they had it before, make their own laws. Thus, we have what Jim Crow was for almost another 95 years until you get somebody like Dr. King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, people like that saying, look, this has got to stop.
mhm.
And just think if we lose that war, what type of condition will we have? Because we won the war. And look what happened to our people for another 95 years.
Yeah,
So if we had lost that, I don't know what this country would have looked
yeah. Yeah, it's a phenomenal point. And I don't know. I mean, many people may have heard the phrase or the terminology, the Jim Crow laws, but I don't know if they necessarily knew where that was and how much that set people back, set the African Americans back because of that. And so, again, I don't know if this is 100% true, and I'm looking, stepping back and looking at it from a global standpoint, but the thinking of the mindset of the time, that slaves, no different than pre 1800s, slaves were considered how industry was how industry was, it was
They,
literally on the backs of people. So
yeah,
it was an industry standard. And
yeah.
then as the North was changing toward other technology, machines,
Hmm.
that was one element. But that didn't necessarily make the other aspect of someone looking different than me should not be treated the same as me. That,
Right.
I mean, they're definitely tied together, obviously, but
Mhm.
just even if we aren't going to use in the same form manual labor in the same way, even though obviously there's other ways they figured out how to do that with sharecropping, all these other aspects of
Right,
things.
right.
But that in itself was a major shift in thinking, probably not just for the slave or the former slave owners, but then also for the individuals for generations who had been in that position.
You're absolutely right. But also think of this. There was a lot of white people, poor white people back in those times that couldn't find work. Why? Because during slavery, why would they pay a white person to work when they had black people working for free?
Yeah.
And then even after slavery, you had white people that were in sharecroppers like black people were sharecroppers. And I think what a lot of those people didn't want, they didn't really want poor blacks and poor whites working together. And I think almost to this day, there are some people that don't want us to come together as human beings and say, this is good for us,
Mm-hmm.
as a people, regardless of our color, this is good for us as a country.
Yeah.
There are people that still don't want that. And reason I say that is think of John Wilkes Booth, who got so angry because Lincoln helped, win the war, brought the slaves in, and then freed the slaves, or was planning on freeing them. He literally went in and blew the man's head off. Now, there were people back then that agreed with that. I just wonder how many people today would say John Wilkes Booth was right. And that concerns me. If we have people today that would say, I think what he did to Lincoln was proper. Those are the kind of questions we have to talk about.
Yeah.
And then we get a sense of why people feel the way they do toward racism, critical race theory, all these things that some people just don't want to talk about. I don't know if you get my point on that, but
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I no 100% agree with that. Is from I think from a very basic, as a counselor, right, as a therapist, very basic level, anything that in, causes or elicit change that it wasn't my choice of change, there's a fear response. And that fear response is one of the two, right? I can be afraid and run away from it, or I can be afraid and become angry and want to fight about it.
right,
And so I think of what I don't know then causes that fear response. And then with some people, then it comes out as anger instead of
right.
instead of asking questions, instead of being open and curious about what I could learn, that I feel threatened.
Yeah. And I think today, because I try to bring everything to where we're at now. One of the main things I always want to do with Juneteenth, I have so many white friends that will come to me and say, I know you've been doing this for years, but I had no idea that I was welcome,
Mm.
that you were welcome. Please. I mean, I know the 200,000 black men helped win the war, but there were a lot of white men that lost their lives fighting for the North,
Mhm.
that their bloodlines stopped because they were trying to make a difference. And what I try to tell people, Juneteenth to me is an American holiday when it actually got to a point where it lived up to what it claimed it was all about in the beginning,
Mhm.
with the Constitution. It just gave us the rights that they never had allowed us to have
Mhm.
over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment solidified everything.
Yeah. So I remember one of the times that I was at Juneteenth celebration a few years ago. I remember it was on a Wednesday, and
Uh-huh.
and at the time I had one of my interns, graduate student interns, with me, and she actually was a first generation Russian. Her mom and grandmother came over from Russia, and as we were going to the venue, and then afterwards we had conversations, and she tied an aspect of it into, for her, that's what has allowed her, what was happening from an immigrant standpoint, of her being able to have an opportunity to get a master's degree, to be able to be a therapist, was a similar type of element that was being celebrated at Juneteenth.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. Because Russia ended their slavery in 1860 when we started our war in America. Russians had slaves too. They weren't Africans. They were other Russian people,
Mhm.
but they were slaves. And they ended their slavery 5 years before we ended it here in America. A lot of people don't know that
No,
either.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
So she really has a reason to be
Yeah,
cheerful.
yeah, exactly. So Tommy, when you think of like the last, well, maybe let me first step back and go. So if someone was gonna come to the Juneteenth celebration, what would they expect? What's some of the activities, some of the vendors, some of the things that are going on?
Well, people that have known me through the years, I started doing this, like I said, will be 33 years ago next week. Uh, I always took the entertainment side of things, local talent, people that wanted to display their talent. If I had rappers, they could not cuss on that stage in front of, especially back then, it was my mother and my father and other people's mothers and fathers. I still to this day don't allow that. Uh, I just like to have a lot of music, public speakers, people like Dorothy Page Turner that can put things down that maybe something Frederick Douglass has said back then that might make a difference. So she has what she calls the Juneteenth Players, and they'll perform that evening before my last two bands finish up. We have stuff like that. Um, I have a young man that did 15 years in prison, him and three comrades. They all did 15 years in prison for rape and murder in Chicago that they didn't do. They were kids when they got charged. He's going to be there to talk a little bit on the section that I call the Chautauqua. I got that from Chuck, oh, the newspaper guy that died.
Oh,
Chuck Sweeney. Chuck
yeah, Chuck
Sweeney.
Sweet, yeah, yeah.
Chuck Sweeney brought about the word Chautauqua. Was years ago, Rockford used to be one of the biggest places around the country where people would come and they would actually do like Juneteenth, see entertainment, public speakers, talk about issues of the day. I want Juneteenth to be like that in a positive way, where we can have music, we can have song, we can have dance, and we can have conversations
Mhm.
to bring us closer together as human beings. That's been my intention for 33 years, and it'll be my intention I leave this earth to bring people together to understand that we have a strange past, but almost every country has had slaves. Every country has had slaves. That's not the issue. Is that America was founded on something that it didn't live up to. And then over time, we did live up to it. And I'd say today, we really have lived up to it. But we're still finding a way to bicker and argue with each other. People like that, they're always going to be here. But I think the majority of us want to work together, live together, raise our families together, and enjoy life before we leave this earth. That's
Yeah.
what I really believe. The majority of Americans want that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and it's the loudest that are probably get the most attention, right?
Mhm.
And but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the majority. And
That's right.
I think that probably stands on a lot of different things, you know,
It does.
but definitely the whole idea that if someone is from a different race or looks differently than me, then then you know then they're not the same as me. And I think that through my experience, you know, first through athletics and then later through counseling and therapy, I know that that has not even remotely been the truth in my life. So
Mine either. I tell you, sports, you know, you play sports, I play sports. Um, I met so many people in high school and playing college football, even playing semi-pro football in Wisconsin. Um, we were like the #1 team in the country for semi-professional in Delavan, Wisconsin, for the 2 years I played for them. I still have communication with white guys that I played football with, and that was in 1978 and 79. We still communicate with each other. Sports brings people together, but really communicating with other people is what helps bring us together for real.
yeah,
We got to start communicating and understanding that somebody might not agree with us. That don't mean they hate us. They just disagree with us. Now we work it out from there if we can.
yeah.
You know,
I a friend of mine, maybe he played at the same time you did. I know he played for Delavan. William Howe.
William Howe,
Howe, yeah, he was from Belvedere. Played defensive back.
you know the year?
I don't know the year, but it would be right around that time period though, because he is, I want to say 70, 71 right now.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
William Howe. That
Or Bill Howe.
Bill Howe. It does sound a little familiar. I'm gonna
I'll,
have to call
I'll
my
have to,
friend Tom Scalisi.
okay.
Tom Scalisi would know because we
Okay.
played together. He's in Beloit,
Gotcha.
Janesville area. I'm to call
Okay.
Tom. William Howell. I'm to write that down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And next time I see him, I'll mention that we had this conversation
Mm-hmm.
and that we were on the show. So when you think about the things that you have seen change in as far as putting together the Juneteenth in the last 30, coming up on 33 years, what has been some of the um maybe at the time you didn't know that they were going to be breakthroughs, but they ended up being breakthroughs, and then the event, the festival had changed and pivoted. What things kind of stand out in your mind in the last 3 decades?
The sponsorships.
Mm,
I hate to say it like that. I started with one or two sponsors years ago, and I was happy just to have them. But my sponsorship level has just grown. And what I do with the money, you know, some of it goes into my not-for-profit, my 501c3, that things that I do year round. But a lot of it goes into Juneteenth itself. And we have some great sponsors. I really couldn't hardly name them all off today
mhm,
because uh, it's so many. But if I could, I just want people to understand it's, it's people like Hard Rock Casino, Comcast, City of Rockford, Rockford Park District, Midland States Bank, the county, Winnebago County. A good friend of mine, Randy and Nancy Loomis, they live up in Roscoe. Uh, and I did mention Winnebago County. Those are the big goal sponsors. Those are the guys that contribute the most. I have a ton of other ones below that. But the
mhm,
reason I bring that up is businesses, companies, people at higher levels are starting to recognize the importance of recognizing Juneteenth.
mhm,
That's a good step for our country because we can start communicating. I went to Target the other day to put up a poster, and the guy was upset because their name wasn't on there. I just never thought to go to a big company like Target, and he really kind of let me have it. You should have been here.
mhm.
So now I'll be there next year,
Yep.
and to me, Kevin, that's going to help bring more people together to understand that this is a great country.
Mhm.
We have a lot of faults. We have a lot of history, but all in all, nobody can say this is not a great country. At least I don't think they can. They can say it if they want to.
Sure.
And my people have really suffered, but we're not the only people that suffered in this country. Poor white people have suffered. Indians have suffered. Uh, at the hands of, sometimes I say, the super wealthy. They kind of like pit us against each other, and then they maintain their control. But I think that's going to change because people are opening up their hearts and their minds to humanity. Humanity is what's important to us, how we treat each other. And I think moving forward, Juneteenth could be something that opens people's hearts and minds to make America a better place. When we're better, the world will be better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and I'm probably stealing this from somebody, but the idea that I don't have to elevate myself by making someone be smaller, right? And so
Right.
this idea that I can like I have to do a talk later this morning, talking about this idea that we're created with this light within us, regardless of
Mm,
our background, regardless of who our parents were, or any of those factors, that we all equally have that light within us, and for all of us, it's represents different things. It's only me, it's only my thoughts based upon what maybe other people do or don't do that makes me eclipse that light, right?
mm-hmm.
And that doesn't make the light go away. It's just like it eclipses it because of my response or reaction to something that someone else does or doesn't do. And so so to be able to invite people into this idea that your light can shine as bright as possible doesn't mean you have to have other people have a smaller light.
Right. You know, I have a good Muslim friend who will be speaking at Juneteenth. You know, I've run a mentoring group for Winnebago County. All
Mm.
my clients are on probation. So he came into my group one day. It's about 8 guys. Some of these guys were pretty hardcore. And he said, I'm going to tell you guys this. You probably know it, but you didn't look at it the way I'm going to say it to you. He says, just imagine when your mother and father laid down to have sex and your father did what he did. It was a million sperms going towards your mother's egg. A million. And you won. Kevin, you won. I won. Everybody that's breathing won that battle against a million other sperms to impregnate our mother. If that don't make a human being special, there's nothing gonna make anybody special.
Yeah.
And once he told me that, I always knew about, how I got here. But it just opened up another dimension of thought that we are all important people.
Yeah.
We need to put it in perspective, but to win that one battle against a million others, that makes you really special just by being here.
Yeah.
And I cling to that. It,
Yeah.
it it just opened up my mind to realize we're all special, but we got to learn to work and live with each other.
Yeah.
We don't always have to agree,
Yeah.
but we can sure live with each other.
Yeah. Well, and I think you make a great point about that, is that I think sometimes the idea of not agreeing with each other is actually the opportunity for growth. Because if we
Mm-hmm.
always agreed with each
Yeah,
other, there's some things that would never change.
right.
you know so
That's
but
right.
but how can I have a different perspective but not necessarily see your perspective as disrespectful or angry or violent or whatever? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's you know a good friend of mine, one of my therapists, she and I have had lots of conversations about this, about that lens, or that lens in which you see through is your own personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't necessarily a bad thing unless you are convinced that no one else everyone has to have the same perspective as you.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's a valid point. That's very true. Everybody, I call it respect.
Yeah.
We have to have respect for another person's viewpoint. I did a documentary with Harlem Veterans Project.
Okay.
A young lady did a documentary on me,
Okay.
and I talked about a guy who I knew, one of my first sponsors in a little town outside of Freeport, Shannon, Illinois. And one of his co-workers who worked for the guy used to come to tell me, why are you always speaking to Larry? Larry hates black people. Why do you always talk football with him and talk to him? I said, well, I treat Larry the way Larry treats me. He might hate black people, but I didn't know that until you said it. And Larry's always treated me good. He sponsored Juneteenth. We always talk football. And how do you go around hating somebody just because somebody else tells you you got to hate them?
Yep.
So that did a lot for me to understand that Larry might not like black people, but me and him got along.
Yep.
So I felt that I would treat him the way he treats me. And when we get to that point of how we treat other people, we all can learn a lot on, how to make things better,
Absolutely. So Tom, if you could let the listeners know, Juneteenth, next Monday, in Rockford. If someone wanted to go, someone wanted to check it out, what time and where's the location?
Well, we're having, when it's close to the weekend, I collaborate with other people. We're having a church service that Sunday morning at 11. At 1 o'clock, we're having a Black graduation on Sunday. We still want to try to encourage young African American students to take advantage of the education when our ancestors couldn't. So that's why we do the Black graduation, because we got a lot of young kids that don't respect education. And then Levin's Live is what Harlan Jefferson does at Levin's Lake every other weekend. He's bringing that Sunday the 18th from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock. So from 11 o'clock to 7 o'clock Sunday, we'll have events. And then all day Monday from 1 o'clock till about 8:45 Monday night will be my continuous. I got speakers, I have bands, I have a talent competition, and I'll put it out there now. If you got some high school age students that can sing or dance, they want to win some money, they better come out and give me a call. I'll put my number out there. If somebody knows somebody with some real talent between now and next Saturday, call me at 815-218-2861, and we'll get them out there and let them display their talents.
Sounds good. Well, Tommy, as always, I appreciate having a conversation with you. I always learn something new whenever we talk, and so I just appreciate you as a person, you as a father, and what you do for our community. So thank you.
Let me say this about you. I really feel if I had my wits about me back in the day, if I had kept my son seeing you, I think he might still be living with us. When we lost you as a counselor for Carlos, he really went the other way. And I don't know how that happened, whether it was insurance or what, but that's how much respect I have for you, that I think my son would still be alive if he had a chance to work with you years ago. Because you really set him on the right road. He really liked you. And some kind of way we lost track.
Well, Tommy, it's probably one of the biggest compliments that anyone could give me. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And that was hard news when I heard about Carlos. That was a hard day. He along with a handful of others is why I started Shatter Our Silence, and so I appreciate. So for anybody that is interested in learning more about Juneteenth and more about Tommy, I will have his information as well as obviously his phone number in the show notes, and so. Definitely take advantage of going out to this coming weekend to Levin's, as well as on the 19th as well. So thank you very much. As always, be kind, and I look forward to being with you next week. Go ahead.
One more point. We have a free trip to Las Vegas for two. 4 days, 3 nights, air and hotel included.
Okay.
And all you got to do is come there. We'll give you a ticket. You don't have to pay for it. We'll give you a ticket.
Oh, nice.
You can win cash all day and the chance to win a trip to Las Vegas.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tommy. All right.
All right, Kevin.
As always, be good, be kind, and I look forward to seeing you next week.